What be the haps? I'm going to talk today about a guy that's a friend of mine. He's kind of a friend, but we've really kind of known each other since college days, which was back in the 70s, early 80s. So I should say 79 is when I started, and then I only did a couple of years. Um, this guy was in my class, and he was an interesting guy. But then I moved after my daughter was born, and got a job and so forth. And he ended up moving out to this area where I'm at now. And he's been a cab driver. So what I'm going to talk about is this gentleman's interesting way. One year, a couple of years ago, he asked me to drive him up to Spokane in order to give him get him to the train so he could go meet somebody in Oregon. And he asked me to drive up. Well, first he asked me to drive down to where he lives, and then drive up, and then reverse things. And that was a lot more driving for me than if he just came up and we took his cab up. So I made that arrangement. Hey, bring your cab up, and we'll drive up from there. So it was the first snow of the year. It started falling just as we were driving out of this town, and we, of course, we had to drop our speed down to 25 miles an hour, and that was quite a drive. And during the time we were driving, it was a new vehicle for him, a new van, and it was nice, good condition, relatively, as far as I knew. And he was talking about what great traction he had, and the power that he had, and so on and so forth. And but he didn't have chains, and so we got up there okay. So I guess the traction, was okay. And got him on the train and headed back out to his cab, and I like to check the tires, so I walked over to the right side. That was closest to me at the time, and I saw that he was almost into his wear bars on his rubber. And I walked around to the left side and found out the right side was the good news. He was into his wear bar on the left side. So that was troubling. I got into his taxi and started the engine, and all of his major warning lights came on. His check engine light, his brake light, his anti-lock brake system light. It was just everything. And so I kept having to pump the brakes to make sure that light went out as I was driving down the way. And it was kind of mushy. And got all the way back and parked his van and waited for him to call back because I didn't have his number where he was at. So the next day he calls and he says, "Okay, well, I'm going to come back on Sunday instead of Monday." Okay, and I go, "Well, okay, hey man, when I turned on your engine, all of your warning lights came on." And I said, "Are you thinking that when you have those lights on, that's what you have? Or are you thinking that there's a problem with it?" So he was really quiet, and I began to realize he was thinking that's indication of what he had. So I said, "Well, let me put it this way. If one of your door lights comes on, are you thinking that it's telling you that you have a door or that there's a problem with it? So he says, well, there's a problem. I got to shut the door. I said, yeah. And so with all these other lights, it's telling you there's a problem. I said, when you get in and turn on your engine and the engine's running, you don't need a light to tell you that you have one. so, so, so he, I told him, you got to get that checked out. You know, I said, your brake system, your anti-lock brake system, those aren't going to be working if there's a problem. I said, you're running a taxi service. You know, you get in an accident with all those on there, they're going to sue you and take your business away. I said, and you've got to get new rubber on there. You know, same thing with your tires. And he, you know, says to me, well, those cost $100 a piece. And I go, well, you can get the cheap tires, but then if you get in an accident, you'll end up with a problem, you know, especially with a customer in there. So anyway, he got the engine checked out. There'd been a problem with it. He got the brakes checked out and figured out that his anti-lock brakes wouldn't have worked because his brakes were having a problem. And he got all that taken care of. And he proudly told me that he got 4 new tires for $100, which means he got used tires on his cab. So that was kind of a problem. Can't really convince him otherwise. But anyway, he's an interesting fellow, and he, you know, he calls up and wants to hang out. And I go, okay, you know, and that usually means, you know, dinner or lunch or something. He wants to go someplace to eat. So one day we decided to go to a Thai food restaurant, and we're in there, and I see a friend of mine from work, and hey, you know, I'd like you to meet each other. So I introduce them, and my cab driver friend says, well, I've been his best friend for 30 years. And I'm sitting there thinking, wait a minute, don't I get to choose that? I mean, I didn't even speak to the guy for 20 after I left college. So, you know, we're just out of contact. And so he claims he was my best friend. Anyway, he's an interesting fellow. I say he's a diamond in the coal because it's going to take tens of thousands of years of pressure to get him to where he'd be in the rough. So, you know, he's got a nice heart. He's got a good heart, but he's just got an interesting way of thinking. So, kind of be wary when you get in a taxi cab. Take a look at the tires as you're going by. see what's on there, you know, for your own safety, you know. And anyway, he's an interesting guy, and it'll be interesting. We've had some interesting times. Well, like one time he ran out of gas. He was trying to take probably about 120-mile trip, and I was the closest person to him that he knew. Well, I only had $10 at the time, and he called me to ask me for gas. I didn't even have a gas can. So I had to go buy a gas can. I had to travel into town, which used up gas. I bought a gas can, put 1 gallon of gas in. I didn't even think that would get him back to town. And at that time, gas was $4 a gallon, better than $4 a gallon. So I get up there, he puts the gas in, and he wants to head on to his destination, which was, you know, quite a ways. I didn't think he'd get there either. I didn't think he'd get back to town. So it was kind of a problem. It used up a lot of my gas getting down to town, back to him, back to my town. And I asked him, well, didn't you fill up with gas before you started taking this trip? He goes, well, I put $10 in. I go, well, that's good, but that's only like 2 gallons. When the gas prices go up, you have to adjust for your price of your gas when you fill your tank. And if you only do $10, you're not going to have much. So it was an interesting little trip. He doesn't often think some things through. Well, like even a couple days after he got back from that trip, it'd been snowing, and he comes into a town near me, and he's on this one road, and his van slides, and he hits the curb, and the curb shears off 3 of his bolts that hold his tire on, his wheel on. And so he gets that taken care of, and he calls me the next day. He says, do you think my competitors are trying to steal my customers? I go, probably not. I mean, people just go through their own lives, just doing their own living. They're really not, people don't really think that way usually. I go, what's going on? And he says, well, his left wheel came off altogether. So I go, well, usually people don't do something like that. Besides, I mean, how are your customers going to know that your wheel fell off unless they're in the cab with you? Anyway, he got that taken care of. And anyway, he's an interesting fellow. I'll tell you more about him later. Anyway, everybody have a great night. Take good care, and we'll see you out there.